When thinking about how we develop cognitively, it's important to appreciate that sometimes we have disruptions to our normal expected development. We call these neurodevelopmental disorders, and we're going to explore two of them. Two you've likely heard of, in fact, are attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, and autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. For ADHD, some common symptoms include an inability or a challenge to pay attention for long periods of time. We call this sustained attention. Individuals diagnosed with ADHD may struggle to regulate their activity levels. This is where we tend to get that hyperactivity component, which tends to be the prototype for what ADHD looks like, though does not necessarily speak to all experiences of ADHD. And finally, impulsivity. So some individuals diagnosed with ADHD may struggle with making decisions that don't necessarily take into account long-term consequences. It tends to be the case that if I struggle with ADHD, I will probably predominantly present with just one of these symptoms, though I may have others. So it's not that someone with ADHD is going to struggle with sustained attention, activity levels, and impulsivity. We could have some individuals with ADHD who predominantly struggle with sustained attention, other individuals who struggle with activity levels, and still others who struggle with impulsivity. This is important to appreciate because even if I have a diagnosis of ADHD, it does not mean I am identical to all individuals with ADHD. I may have very different challenges and experiences than other people diagnosed with ADHD. In terms of some of the contributing factors that may put people at higher risk for developing ADHD are genetics. We do tend to find through twin adoption studies that there is a high link of genetics. We also have found correlates, various biopsychological correlates with dopamine, as well as norepinephrine levels. There may be disrupted activity in the frontal lobe. And from an environmental standpoint, we found a link between prenatal nicotine exposure to some of these biological correlates, as well as lead exposure. Now, I say some of these could be contributing factors. It's not necessarily that any one of these is the sole culprit. So it could be the case that early childhood exposure to lead might actually trigger an underlying gene that might put me at risk for developing ADHD. I might in fact have genes that predispose me to ADHD, but if I'm perhaps not exposed to nicotine or not exposed to lead early on in life, those genes may remain dormant and never become expressed. This is again where it's important to appreciate the study of epigenetics, that connection to the environment and our genes. Now, with autism or autism spectrum disorder, again, we see certain categories of symptoms. Some individuals who are diagnosed with ASD will struggle more with social interactions. They may struggle with communication or development of language. In this, you could imagine if I struggle with communication, that could also make social interactions more challenging. So some of these symptoms could be related and feed into each other. And finally, some individuals diagnosed with autism may demonstrate what are called compulsive behaviors. So a feeling that I need to do a behavior, and that can allow them to actually feel less stressed because they can feel more control over their environment. So if I need to be flipping a card or something and that allows me to feel more relaxed, that compulsive behavior may in a sense be a coping mechanism. Now, as far as contributing factors that might put individuals at greater risk for developing autism spectrum disorder, of course, we see again genetics tends to be a large factor, and we see that from twin adoption studies. pollutants in the environment, particularly mercury, a lack of vitamin D. What you don't see here, so in terms of things that do not cause these neurodevelopmental disorders, vaccinations are not a likely cause of autism spectrum disorder, or for that matter, ADHD. So we shouldn't be worried about vaccinations leading to these neurodevelopmental disorders. Additionally, parenting styles. So, a lot of times, if my child has been diagnosed with a neurodevelopmental disorder, I might be inclined to want to look at my own behaviors as a parent and say, what did I do? Was there a choice I made? Did I not raise them correctly? That is not the case. That my parenting choices, short of being very negligent of my children, as long as I am taking care of my children's needs, parenting styles are not a risk factor for these neurodevelopmental disorders.